Good morning. Are you ready for a good day? Oh my gosh, do we have some surprises you are going to love today? Hi, I'm Richard Rogers, and while Reverend Mirage isn't here this month, I get the opportunity to show up. Somebody said, oh, you get to be at the big church this month. I do. I get to be at the big church this month. So we're glad you're here with us today.
Now is that time in our service for a time of prayer and meditation. Love that line that says, I can feel the brush of angels' wings. Because we live in a universe that is filled with angels. And there are always angels amongst us to bless us and to inspire us and to encourage us and to support us. So as we enter into this time of prayer and meditation this morning, just invite you to think of all the various opportunities you've had in your life to be blessed by all the angels in your life. So let's just take a moment now to breathe, to relax, to get comfortable in our seats. Now take a few moments to allow your mind to slow down. And allow the Spirit of God to come forth in you. Allow that healing, that strengthening, that encouraging presence to remind you how precious you are. This great human family that we participate in. Allow that Spirit to remind you that there is never anything beyond your reach. To remind you that your capacity for expressing God is unlimited. So once again, I invite you to take another deep breath. And for the next few moments, give yourself permission to be quiet and to be still. And to be reflective. And be open and receptive to whatever it is that God has in store for you this day and each day to come. There's a great unity affirmation that says, right now, we are the sons and daughters of the living God. For that reality, may we be ever so grateful. Amen.
So about 2 months ago, I went to Craig and Sally Joe and said, I want to do a flash mob. I said, I want to do a service on Living Bold, and I want to do a flash mob. And Sally Joe said, what song do you want to do? And I said, I don't care. And she worked out the dance numbers, and Craig did the music, and didn't they do a fabulous job? So I want all my flash mobbers to stand up. Will you stand up? They're all here. Started us off. Thank you, flash mobbers. Some of us were concerned about singing. Some of us were concerned about dancing. And some of us were concerned about the whole experience, right? So one of the ladies next to me, Mary Beth, where are you? Are you there? Mary Beth has been coming for the ministry for just over a year. Last August, she joined the choir, and she whispered to me, and she said, I would have never done this a year ago. So Mary Beth, great shout out to you. So, one of the things that I love about this place is no matter how big your box is when you get here, we're going to stretch it. Because our relationship with God is really bigger than most of us were led to believe. How many of you can see that your relationship with God is much bigger than it was a few years ago? Your beliefs, your relationship, your life, your love, your heart is bigger. You know, one of the things I love about this place is that we really are committed to helping spiritual people live greater and better lives. And that's what we're about over and over again, is helping people live better lives. Because for some of us, we grew up in boxes that were just too small. And while Reverend Mirage is on vacation this month, I'm going to share with you 4 spiritual ideas about life. Last week, we started with living in the now, and the idea of bringing every moment into this moment, allowing ourselves to be fully present in the now. And today, what I want to talk about is living bold. And what that truly means as a spiritual being, to live bold. Because most of us have a fear or a story that has kept us from living free and living bold. And what if today you were willing to let go of your story and your fears to live the greatest, most dynamic version of yourself? See, I have this belief that every child comes into the world free, absolutely free. And they're living, and as a child you begin to live your freedom until the first person shames you. And then the next person shames you, and the next person shames you, and you begin to withdraw into what you think is your safe little world. And yet that's not how God made you. God made you to be wild and bold and free. And what we're about is really learning to let go of the shame of the past so that we can be the greatest version of ourselves today. And each one of us is in that process as we understand it, to live bold, to live free, to live the best version of ourselves. Jesus said, let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and give glory to God. And his ministry over and over again was to call people into their spiritual boldness. And one of the things that's interesting right now is there was a recent survey that said that 40% of the people say they attend church on a weekly basis. Statistically, actually, only about 20% of the people attend church on a weekly basis, right? So 40% of the people say they attend church on a weekly basis. The actual number is about 20%. So not only are they not going to church, but they're lying about it. Right? So the number is really about 20%. And if you're in England right now, the number is about 2%. So about 2% of the people in England go to church on a weekly basis. So is the problem with the people or is the problem with the church? Not only do people have to learn how to recapture their boldness, but I believe the church has to recapture its boldness. That if we're not willing to be bold, people have other things to do. There used to be a time in our distant spiritual past where people would light a bonfire and they would come from village after village and they would dance around this fire over and over again to celebrate the joy of their God, to celebrate what God has blessed them with. And they would put their whole heart and soul into this dance that they would do around this fire, and they would be fully present in the celebration of all that life is. And over the last several thousand years, we keep dialing back the celebration. We keep dialing back the boldness. We keep dialing back the aliveness of the church until it feels like blah, 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 blah. And after you've heard that 100 times, you pretty much know how it's going to go. And why would I want to go to a place that makes me feel bad and isn't fully alive? So not only do we have to be more bold in our lives, but we have to be more bold in our church. And one of the amazing things about the church is for many of us, it was one of the first places that shut us down. That told us it wasn't okay to be where we are or who we are. And we began to play smaller because we had to act right in the church. How many of you, for your Sunday school or first religious experience, you really knew, you were taught very quickly that you had to get smaller to fit in the box at your church? Right? I want you to see that, right? That you couldn't say things too loud. You couldn't talk in church. You couldn't have much fun. You definitely couldn't laugh in church. How many of you were raised in a church where you couldn't clap even? That clapping was somehow seen as like the devil was going to get in there, right? You know, like I don't understand that, right? And there's this idea that we just keep playing it smaller and smaller. And, you know, what happens if we take all the life out of something? Nobody wants to go. And what if today you got to bring your full, bold self into church and fully celebrate God right here, right now, in all the ways that you've wanted to celebrate God? So we're in this dance today. Is the spiritual life about being bold and fully alive? Or is the spiritual life about being quiet and appropriate and doing it right? Thessalonians 4:11 says, make your goal to be a quiet life. Mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we've instructed you. I mean, with all due respect, I mean, come on, right? And then Jesus goes off and says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the world. And it's, come on. You know, because the reality is his ministry was anything but that. His ministry was radical. It was confrontational. He was an anarchist. And I know you can't say that, but he was. Like, he invited people to have a very different relationship with God. He didn't believe you had to go through the priest or the higher up. He believed that God was within us and in each and every one of us. And he turned over the tables and he made a mess. And he invited people, spiritual life, to come alive again. And people responded. People responded. So where are you in your spiritual journey? Are you still trying to be quiet and do it right? Are you willing to live bold? To live your life out loud? To speak the truth of who you are and to let your light so shine that others see your good work and give glory to God? And if you were going to be the boldest version of yourself, who and what would you be today? How fully are you willing to express God? So on the internet, there were a video on YouTube or whatever of these two guys, and they were playing basketball. And one guy was a big guy, really big guy, right? Big old paws, big guy, right? One guy was a little guy. And they were playing a game of basketball, and I'm assuming it was up to 10. And the little guy was just shooting the lights out of it. I mean, he was just dropping everything from whatever distance. He would just break free of the big guy, drop it in. And the big guy was trying to manhandle him. He was trying to control him. And the little guy was having none of it. He was just dropping it in. And the more he just embarrassed the big guy, the more angry the big guy got. And they were at 10 points like that. The big guy was furious. He's trying to get his arms around the little guy. The little guy's doing one of those Muhammad Ali bob and weaving. And the big guy just wants to clobber him. And he's like, he's like a big old bear of a guy. He's trying to grab him, right? And the little guy just keeps, bobbing and weaving. And finally, the big guy can't take it anymore. And he takes a poke at him, right? And he does one of these big old swings, and everybody could see what was coming. And the little guy just ducked, right? He just ducked. The punch went right over him. And then he actually leaves his feet. He catapults himself toward the big guy. It was like one of those superhuman cartoon superhero things, and he jumps toward the big guy's face, and as he's flying through the air, he's coming at him, and he pops him with everything. So he's got all of his weight, all of his momentum, all of his strength flying through the air. Boom! The guy goes, boom, drops. So my question for you today, right, is which one was the bold one? The big, egotistical, loud bully, or the quiet, smaller, get-it-done short guy? How many of you want to vote for the big, loud guy as the bold one? How many want to vote for the little guy? All right, great, all right. Now, I can hear some of you thinking, Richard, you're condoning violence in church. You're telling a story of two guys beating each other up. I said, well, really, only one guy got beat up. It wasn't much of a fight. I mean, really, it was one punch and he was out. But I get your point, right? I mean, how many of you think violence is okay? Nobody, right? Nobody thinks violence is okay. So let's go to Scripture. So have you ever heard the story of David and Goliath? Anybody heard the story of David and Goliath? Okay, so it's 1 Samuel 17. And I'm going to read from my children's Bible because I think, by and large, that's where most of us live. All right? So from my children's Bible. Now the Philistines gathered their army and went to battle with Israel. And Saul gathered his army, and they pitched their tents. The Philistines stood in the mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. Then Goliath, who was about 10 feet tall, came out of the camp of the Philistines. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and his arms were covered in heavy brass. And he had brass around his legs and between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was huge. And the head of his spear weighed 600 pounds. And he carried a shield as well. And he stood there looking over the valley and cried to the army of Israel, choose a man among you and let him come to fight me. And if he was able to fight me and kill me, then all the Philistines will be your servants. But if I kill him, then all of you will be our servants and will serve us. And the men of Israel saw Goliath, and they were afraid. But David was not. Saul went to David, and David said to Saul, I will fight Goliath. You cannot fight Goliath, for he is a man of war, and he's been a man of war since his youth, and you are still but a boy. And said Saul to David. But David replied, while I was keeping my father's sheep, a lion came, and he took a lamb from my flock. And I went after him, and I hit him, and took the lamb out of his mouth. Then I caught him with his beard, and hit him again and again, till I killed him. And if I can kill a lion, then I can kill Goliath. And the Lord said to him, the Lord saved me from his paw of the lion, and he will save me from the hand of the Philistines. Then go, Saul said, and God be with you. Saul's army armored David with all the armor, and they put a helmet of brass upon his head, and around him they coated him in brass. And David said to Saul, I cannot wear all this, for I have never worn armor before. But then remove it. And he took the staff from his hand, and he took 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in a bag. And then he took a sling, and he went toward Goliath. And Goliath saw David, and he laughed, for David was an unarmed boy, and he advanced to kill Goliath. You come to me without a sword and without a spear, but I have come to you in the name of the Lord and the armies of the Lord, which I will defeat you. And Goliath started toward David, and David put his hand in the bag and took out 1 small stone and put it in his sling and began to sling it, and slung it at Goliath and hit his forehead, and Goliath fell to his death. When the Philistines saw Goliath was dead, they all ran. See, boldness is an interesting thing. Because sometimes being big and loud and egotistical is not bold at all. It's a little fearful place within us that we think we have to do all these gestures and be so loud because on the inside we're scared to death. But boldness is really something much more deeper, something much more profound. David didn't want all the armaments. He didn't want all the stuff. He didn't know how to use it. He didn't need it. He had God. And with the boldness of his God, he was willing to go forth and do what he knew he could do. See, I believe in all of our lives there's things that God is calling us to do that on the outside looks crazy. It looks crazy for us to even try it. It looks crazy for us to do it. And yet there's something inside of us that says, you can do this. This is yours. And it's only when we're willing to really be bold enough in spirit, bold enough in character, bold enough in who we are, that we are able to go forth and do that which we've never done before. See, the world needs spiritual people who are willing to be bold. This isn't a time for us to be timid and to pull back. This is a time for really honoring the Spirit of God that is within us and to be willing to go forth and do that which we know is ours to do. See, it would be great if somebody else is going to transform the world for us. But the reality is, it's not ever going to happen that way. The only way the world has ever been transformed is by people. Normal, everyday people who decide to make a small difference in their life and in their world, and they make radical change. What I'd like you to see today is that I believe that we're all, in one way or another, living in a way that's not fully as bold as Spirit's calling us to live. And that each one of us in our own way has a story or a fear or a doubt that causes us to hold back. And today what I want to give you is 5 areas, 5 thoughts, 5 ideas about living more bold. And the first one is that we have to live connected. We have to live connected to the Spirit of God within us. We have to live connected to our truest self, to the power within. That the more that we connect with our source, the more that we connect with our God, the more that we begin to call forth that is within us, it's an amazing thing. There's this quote in the Gospel of Thomas, which is an uncanonized gospel, and says, if you call forth that is within you, that is within you will save you. If you do not call forth that is within you, that is within you will destroy you. I believe that that's the time when we're at right now. that we're either going to call forth the greatness that's within us, or we'll figure out a way to destroy ourselves. And that's in all of us. So the first one is you have to live connected. The second one is that you have to live listening to the Spirit of God within you. You actually have to take time out of your busy life to actually listen to what the Spirit of God in you is trying to reveal to you. Just like we have physical senses, we have spiritual senses. And I believe that that's what the 5 smooth stones that David had in his pocket, that's what they represent, is our 5 spiritual senses. And just like we have physical senses, we have spiritual senses. And the more that we begin to listen to the voice of God within us, the more we begin to listen to our true self, to the quiet voice within us, the more we're not only connected, but we actually know what to do. How many of you have been guided or directed to do something, and you're still waiting to do it? Anybody? You don't have to raise your hand. Right? Because each one of us in our own way has one of those areas in our life where we know that we're being guided, we know that we're being directed, but our fear holds us back, and that takes us to 3. 3 is we got to be willing to live fearlessly. The only way we can transform this world is when we're willing to live fearlessly. You know, just because we're afraid doesn't mean that we have to stop. Just because we're afraid doesn't mean that we don't take the next step. You don't have to spend years resolving all your fears to be an instrument for God. You just have to do it anyway. Like there's no penalty for being afraid and doing it anyway. You just have to do it. God needs you to actually do it. No matter how afraid you are, do it. And 4. 4 is an interesting one because 4 is about letting go of outcomes. And if we're willing to be an instrument for God, we want it to work out the way we want it to work out. Amen? Like, okay, God, I'll be your instrument as long as it works out for me. Right? And we know exactly how it's supposed to work out. And if it doesn't work out that way, we get really disappointed. We get angry. We get a little ticked off at our Creator. Well, God, I did this, and look at what a mess it is. Why did I even have to do this if it was going to be such a mess? And then we watch as the whole thing evolves, and it's transformed into a way that was much better than you were ever conceiving. So we have to stay connected. We have to listen. We have to live fearlessly. And we have to let go of outcome. And the 5th one is that we have to live dedicated and grateful. There's a moment in every soul's life where they decide to dedicate their life again to God. And at that moment, something magical happens. It's because when the moment you dedicate yourself to God, there is a greater blessing that begins to happen in your life. That you're no longer living out of your ego or your situation or what you can figure out. It now takes on a whole nother meaning, a whole nother experience, a whole nother power. My first ministry was in a town called Merced, California. Anybody ever heard of Merced, California? First ministry from Merced, California. And about the first 6 months or so into my first ministry, I really wanted my talks to be better. You know, I dedicated my life to being an instrument for God, for being, in some way, God's mouthpiece, to be able to share a message with people that would give them hope and inspire them and courage to live a better life. And my talks were okay. They were kind of like B's. Someday B minuses, someday B plus, but they were about B's. And then one day I said, okay, God, I'll say anything you want me to say. And in fact, if you don't give me anything to say, I'll stand up there and say nothing. That I'm 100% dedicating my life to you, to being your instrument. And that very day, my talks got better. And sometimes much better, right? And because the reality is, I know what's on this piece of paper, right? And I know that sometimes my talks are much better than I think where I'm going. And it's as though the Spirit of God uses me to say what needs to be said in that moment, in that room, in that experience. And because of that, I've had the opportunity to talk all over the country. But it's not me. I mean, it is me, and it's not me. And there's something that happens when you dedicate yourself fully to God. Because then it's no longer about you, your ego. It's about being a servant, being a channel, being an instrument. I had a friend when I rowed crew in college, 8 guys in a boat, strokes. His name was Mark. Mark rowed on the 7th seat, and 7th seat was a leadership position in the boat because he was part of setting the tempo for the whole boat. And Mark was strong. He was really strong. But the thing about Mark is every time he'd go on to a workout, he would dedicate himself to God. He would say, okay, God, use me in this workout. And he was unbelievable. He was stronger, had more endurance. He could row like nobody's business. And it was because every day he dedicated himself to God. And as a young man in college, in my early 20s, I thought that was nuts. I mean, I was living my most fun, imaginable life. I was single and in college, and there's no way I was going to dedicate my life to God. Anybody been there? Right? It didn't even occur to me to dedicate myself to God. I thought when I get older, yeah, great, no problem, right? But I watched this young man do miraculous things from his dedication to God. So you ready for your homework? I want 2 things today. I want you to be willing to really look at your dedication to God. Where are you with that? And what would that look like if you dedicated your life, your future, your work, your family, all that you are, all that you hope to be? What would that look like if you dedicated that to God? Can you imagine that as great as your life is right now, that as you dedicate it to God, it's going to get significantly better? Because you're going to be a greater channel. You're going to be more bold. Because now you're no longer living for yourself, but you're living for something greater than yourself. That what you're not here any longer just to protect your ego and defend and make sure you look good. You're actually here to be an instrument of something greater. So that's number 1. I want you to dedicate yourself to God. And 2, I want you to be bold. I want you to be willing to look at the things in your life where you know you've been holding back. And I want you to be bold. I want you to boldly go forth to do what Spirit calls you to do in a way that makes a difference in the world. We're at a critical time. And I believe that as each one of us is willing to go forth with a spirit of boldness, we transform the world in a way that's better, in a way that includes all, where all people get to move together to a greater day. You ready? Now, you guys ready? Now, we began this service by letting people play with being bold. And we're going to end this service by letting you play with the idea of being bold. So Sally, Joe, and Craig and the band, thank you guys. We are going to do one more verse. You want to play? Come on, everybody stand up. Here we go.